How does a man facing 16 felony charges end up free without paying a single dollar? Why was Gary Siders Sr. released while others connected to the same case remain behind bars? And what if the real reason has nothing to do with weak evidence, but everything to do with money? Most people think they already know why this happened. They don't. There's one overlooked detail that explains how Gary Siders Sr. walked out of custody with 16 charges still hanging over him and $0 paid. Once you see it, you'll understand why almost everyone has been asking the wrong question. This is the story almost nobody is telling. $0. That's what it cost Gary Siders Sr. to walk out of custody. Not a reduced bond, not a payment plan, not a discount negotiated by an expensive lawyer. Zero. A 73-year-old man facing 16 separate felony counts, the same charges his son, his daughter-in-law, and his wife are still sitting in jail cells on right now, walked out the door without paying a single cent. No bail posted, no bond paid, nothing. I need you to sit with that for a second, because the instinct when you hear something like this is to assume there's a logical explanation. Maybe the charges got dropped. Maybe a judge decided the evidence was weaker against him specifically. Maybe something happened behind closed doors that quietly changed the trajectory of his case. None of that happened. The charges are still there. 16 counts. Second-degree felonies. The exact same ones. So what actually happened here? Because I think the real explanation is stranger and honestly more uncomfortable than any theory you're imagining right now. If this case already has you questioning how the system works, you're in the right place. We dig deep into cases where the answers create more questions than they solve. Hit that subscribe button for reopened crime scenes, because this story gets more complicated with every detail. If you've been following this case out of Ohio, you already know the shape of it. The house in Hamden. 16 children. Conditions officials described using language most of them said they'd never had to use before in their careers. 4 people arrested. Gary Siders Sr., his wife, his son Gary Siders Jr., and his daughter-in-law. All 4 charged with 16 felony counts each. All 4 initially held in Vinton County Jail. Bonds set at $300,000. Not one of them able to post it. Not at first. But here's the specific detail I don't think has gotten the attention it deserves. 3 of those 4 people are still behind bars right now. Same charges, same evidence, same case. Gary Siders Sr. is home. Not because the charges went away. Not because a jury found him innocent. Because a judge modified his bond from a cash requirement to what's called a recognizance bond, which is essentially a written promise to show up for court. No money required. The only condition? He has to wear an electronic monitoring device so the county knows where he is at all times. And the reason that happened comes down to something most people outside the legal system never think about, because most people never have a reason to. Gary Siders Sr. is 73 years old. At some point after his arrest, while being transported for a court appearance, he fell. He was hospitalized after that fall, and doctors discovered, or maybe confirmed, it's not entirely clear which, that he has a serious underlying medical condition. Not a broken bone you set and move on from. Something that requires ongoing specialized care. Here's where it gets complicated. If you're convicted and sentenced to prison, the state pays for your medical care. That's built into how incarceration works. But if you're only accused, arrested, charged, sitting in a county jail waiting for trial, still legally presumed innocent, the county you're being held in is financially responsible for whatever medical treatment you need. Not the state. The county. And Vinton County is one of the smallest, least populated, poorest counties in the entire state of Ohio. According to the prosecutor's own public statements, the county was already asking commissioners for an additional $20,000 just to keep prosecuting this case. The state approved an emergency fund of $1 million to help cover foster care costs for the 16 children removed from that home. Clinton County, in other words, was already operating well outside its normal budget. Now add the question of whether it can also afford specialized ongoing medical treatment for a 73-year-old man in custody who hasn't been convicted of anything yet. So a judge made a decision, modified his bond, released him under electronic supervision. And I keep turning that decision over because I think there are two completely opposite ways to read it, and I don't think either one is obviously wrong. One version says this is the system working exactly as it's supposed to. Presumption of innocence isn't just something lawyers say in opening statements. It's supposed to mean something practical. A man hasn't been convicted of anything yet. Denying him necessary medical care because a small county can't afford the bill would be its own kind of injustice. Ohio's constitution limits how bond can be used. It's not supposed to function as punishment before conviction. It's supposed to secure someone's return to court. Nothing more. If the county genuinely couldn't provide adequate medical care while he remained in custody, and a judge determined electronic monitoring reasonably ensured he wouldn't flee, then this is exactly the mechanism designed to handle a situation like this. The other version, and I think this is what a lot of people are actually feeling even if they can't fully articulate why, is that something about this still doesn't sit right. 16 children, conditions officials described as some of the worst they'd personally encountered. And the man facing those same 16 charges is at home right now, wearing an ankle monitor, sure, but home. While 3 other people connected to the exact same allegations remain behind bars, each still held on $300,000 bonds they haven't been able to pay. I don't think those two readings cancel each other out. I think they're both true at the same time. And that's what makes this so deeply uncomfortable. Let's talk about what it actually means for him to be out right now. He's required to check in with a bond officer. He's required to keep the court updated on any change of address or phone number. He's required to appear at every single scheduled hearing. Missing one would presumably trigger a warrant and land him right back in custody, medical condition or not. The electronic monitor tracks his location continuously, which means the county still knows exactly where he is 24 hours a day. His attorney, Dorian Ball, has been outspoken about how this case has been handled publicly. He's pushed back against the Attorney General's characterization of the situation, using words like exaggeration. He's also said something that deserves to be taken seriously. The Siders family and extended family members have received actual threats of violence. Death threats from various corners of the internet. And some of those threats are against people who, by every indication, had nothing to do with any of this and have never been charged with anything. Anger at what officials say was found inside that house doesn't make threats against anyone acceptable. Ball cited those threats as part of why he's been careful about disclosing details regarding Gary Sr.'s current location or ongoing care. So here we are. A man facing 16 felony counts is free while his family sits in jail. A poor county made an impossible choice between financial collapse and constitutional obligation. And the public reaction has been so intense that people tangentially connected to this case are now afraid for their safety. This is only the beginning. In part 2, we're going back to the house in Hamden, to the 16 children, to the investigation that officials say still haunts them. Because to understand whether justice is being served here, you need to know what actually happened inside that home. If you want answers, if you need to see where this goes, like this video and stay subscribed to Reopened Crime Scenes, because what comes next is worse than you think. 3 people are sitting in jail cells right now because they can't afford to pay for their freedom. 1 person is home because the jail couldn't afford to keep him. Same house, same charges, same evidence. That's not a rhetorical trick. That's a genuinely strange asymmetry sitting right at the center of how this case has unfolded, and I don't think anyone has really stopped to ask what that actually means. Gary Siders Jr., Christina Siders, and Elizabeth Siders are each still being held on $300,000 cash bonds. Not because a judge decided they were more dangerous than Gary Sr. specifically. As far as public record shows, no judge has made that comparative determination at all. They're in jail because they or their families haven't been able to raise that amount of cash. Gary Sr. is out because raising money was never actually the deciding factor in his case. Keeping him in custody became functionally a math problem the county couldn't solve. I don't think that's a conspiracy. I don't think anyone made a secret decision that Gary Sr. deserved better treatment than the other 3 defendants. I think it's something more mundane, and in some ways more unsettling than that. A legal and financial system responding mechanically to a medical emergency, without much room to weigh the optics of how that response would actually look against everything else happening in this case. But here's where it gets stranger. While we're watching one defendant walk out on $0 because of budget constraints, something else is happening in parallel. Something that tells you exactly how serious officials believe this case actually is. Every single one of the 4 defendants in this case is now undergoing formal mental health evaluations ordered by the court. Gary Sr., Gary Jr., Christina, Elizabeth, competency evaluations. Requests for potential insanity defenses tied specifically to the time period the alleged offenses occurred. That's not normal for most criminal cases. It's happening here across all 4 people more or less simultaneously. If you're finding yourself questioning every detail of this case, you're not alone. We break down cases where the system itself becomes part of the story. Subscribe to Reopened Crime Scenes because what comes next gets even more complicated. Elizabeth Siders' attorney filed for a competency evaluation for her, alongside a request that if she's found competent, she also be evaluated for a potential insanity defense. That request came after similar evaluations had already been requested and granted for Gary Sr., for Gary Jr., and for Christina. 4 defendants. 4 separate mental health examinations, all moving through the system at the same time. And then there's the other track, the one that doesn't involve criminal charges at all, but might actually tell you more about where this case is headed. The state of Ohio is pursuing permanent custody of all 16 children, not temporary placement, not a path back toward reunification. Permanent termination of parental rights. That is legally one of the highest bars a state can reach for. Courts generally don't move toward that outcome unless they believe the children were in what's legally defined as imminent danger. Vinton County is pursuing exactly that outcome, according to the prosecutor's own public statements. That tells you something about where officials believe the evidence actually points, even before any criminal trial has taken place. So let that sit for a second. One track of this case, the bond situation, looks like it's softening. 1 defendant out. Medical considerations. Budget constraints. But the other track, the permanent custody proceedings, is moving forward in parallel, completely separate from the criminal bond decisions. One track is getting more serious, not less. Even while one specific defendant is currently living outside a jail cell, I keep thinking about the sheer scale of what a county this size is actually being asked to handle right now. 16 children needing ongoing care. 4 separate competency and mental health evaluations, each requiring specialized forensic examiners. A prosecutor's office that's already had to ask commissioners for emergency funding just to keep the case moving. A special prosecutor brought in from a different county entirely because the original office needed additional support. And now, on top of all of that, the specific medical needs of a 73-year-old defendant that the county by its own account simply couldn't afford to manage while he remained behind bars. None of that is an excuse for anything that allegedly happened inside that house. I want to say that plainly, because I don't want anything I've walked through here to read as minimizing what officials have described. It's not. What it is, I think, is an honest look at how a small, under-resourced county government actually functions when it's suddenly asked To handle a case of this size, this complexity, and this level of national attention all at once, with a budget built for something much smaller, where does that leave things right now? As of today, Gary Siders Sr. is out. Free in the sense that matters legally. Not in custody, not behind bars. Currently living somewhere he hasn't publicly disclosed, wearing a monitor that tracks his location continuously. He paid nothing to make that happen. The reason wasn't a judge's assessment of his danger to the public. It was a county's assessment of what it could and couldn't afford to pay for medically while keeping him detained. Gary Siders Jr., Christina Siders, and Elizabeth Siders remain in custody, still unable to raise the $300,000 each of their bonds requires. All four still face the exact same 16 felony counts. All four have pleaded not guilty. None of them have been convicted of anything. The grand jury process is still moving forward slowly through a county court system that, by the prosecutor's own account, only convenes roughly every other month. And underneath all of that, 16 children remain in the custody of Ohio's child welfare system. While the state pursues what officials have confirmed is an attempt to permanently sever their legal relationship with every single adult connected to that house. I don't think there's a clean, satisfying way to close this out. I don't think this story has earned one yet. And I'm not going to manufacture one just to give this a tidier ending than the facts actually support. What I can tell you clearly is what's documented, what's confirmed, and what remains genuinely unresolved. A man facing 16 felony counts is home right now, having paid $0 to get there. Not because anyone decided the charges against him mattered less, but because a small Ohio county couldn't afford the alternative. If this case left you with more questions than answers, leave a comment below. And if you want updates as this case moves forward, hit that like button and stay subscribed to Reopened Crime Scenes. Because we'll keep following this, and we'll bring you what's actually confirmed, not the version of this story that feels simpler than it actually is.